So, good morning, everyone. So, just a very quick recap about why this subject of confidence and how to feel more okay. And what I mentioned last time is that it's a recurring topic that comes up in for all ages, in all situations, people from all sorts of backgrounds. And it affects our life. It affects how we enjoy ourselves. It affects our levels of fulfillment. And I believe that we have a lot of possibility to affect how we feel and how we cope with things. And that doesn't mean to say that there aren't external factors which can have huge impacts on our life. But the bit that I'm interested in is what we then do with that, how we react to that, and how we get a sense of how much choices that we have available, how many options, and to not feel boxed. And that often when stress happens, it's when we feel that we don't have choice. So last time I mentioned that my suggestion is that confidence isn't a thing, it's not static, it's not fixed in time, that it depends on a whole range of things. And I mentioned 6 aspects. That confidence can change according to the situation, the context, the environment that you're in. And sometimes we feel more or less confident according to whether we're doing something familiar, perhaps something new, something unplanned or planned. Also, what we do, our behavior, how we think, how we act, and how we hold our bodies, how we breathe. Those are all important aspects of how we feel about ourselves and our emotions and our thinking processes. The third one was about the skills and experiences we access and how we can develop those, but also how we can draw on skills that we already have and experiences, good memories and situations that we've already dealt with, perhaps in another context, and kind of map them over, bring that kind of confidence over into a new situation or something less familiar. My fourth one was about the things that we focus on, our values, our beliefs, and our thoughts about what we're able to do, what we're not able to do, what others are able to do, our thoughts about the situation and how much control we have. So that's really about our beliefs about things. The fifth one was about how we perceive ourselves, our identity, and how we use language like I am a shy person, I'm somebody that's not so confident, or I'm somebody that enjoys meeting people. I am someone that's an adventurer. I'm someone that experiments. So these senses of identity can affect the kind of behaviors and the way that we access choices. And my sixth point was about what this is all for, our sense of purpose, our sense of where we're heading, where we're putting our attention to. In a big way, you might say our vision, but that sounds a bit corporate. In day-to-day, it's about why am I doing this and what am I looking at and what draws my attention. So that's a quick sort of recap. And what I want to do today is just really use some practical examples about this, things that I've noticed, and there might be some that Laura or anyone else that joins us shares as well. So, and again, I want to keep this quite practical and drawing from the very common experiences that I find when I've been working over the years with hundreds of different clients. So we'll see how time goes. There's 3 potential patterns of behavior or situation that I'm going to explore, but we may not even cover those. We'll just see how it goes and what comes up for if there's any questions. Well, first of all, the concept behind this is that I'm really curious when I'm working with people and also myself about how we do the things that we do, how we've learnt to do them, and what are the components of what we do. That might sound a bit strange to say that, but someone will say to me, I want to work on something like confidence. They say I might be very shy, or I go very quiet in meetings. And one of the questions I ask them and myself is, how is it that they are doing what they're doing? How do you do shy? How do you go from being quite confident, chatting away with one person, and then when you sit down with a group of others, you suddenly feel not so able, you feel perhaps less important, or there might be some whole emotional stuff going on, chemicals in your, adrenaline coming in. And I'd quite like to understand how that happens, because when we understand what we're doing, whether it's got a good or bad result, we can then decide if that's not achieving what we want, how can we modify it? But we've got to understand what we're doing first. It's a bit, if I can use the analogy of like driving, we can become proficient in driving, we go into automatic zone. But it's very difficult to improve our driving if we stay in that automatic zone, that kind of flow state of just driving. And sometimes we don't even know how we've got to a certain place, because we're just going through situations, probably quite safely, through traffic lights, turnings, but we're not really aware consciously what we're doing. And in order to develop our skills, in this case driving, we need to kind of go back to basics and say, well, what is it I'm actually doing? Where am I focusing on? What's my driving skills like, and which ones could I change? So that's just a bit of background of what I'm talking about, but I'll give you some examples. So my first one is a pattern which I call set the bar. And it often starts by someone in front of me saying that they're trying to achieve something, but it's a big struggle. And I notice what they're doing with their eyes. And just to emphasize it, I often say, well, where do you set your bar? If this was like you're running hurdles, where's your first hurdle? And what they do is they do this. They look straight away up. And I've noticed that people who feel overwhelmed, not everyone, but a number of people that I've worked with that feel overwhelmed, feel unable to start something off. It's like, I want to get this done, but I seem to be resisting it. I seem to be procrastinating. So it kind of links this same thing about this, where's your bar? Because when people put the bar right up, now if we would kind of use the analogy of hurdles, and if you've not done hurdles, you probably know what they are, a series of like gate posts that you jump over in a race or an athletic track. So how realistic would it be if your hurdle was 2 meters high and about 30 centimeters from your face? Yeah, I mean, even pole vaulters have a tool. They have a very long pole, and they have a place to sprint out, to actually get momentum and to use leverage. And yet we can put our pictures, our images, our concepts of what we're trying to work on up there. Sometimes it's derived from comparison, like comparison with some unidentifiable thing, like I've got to be perfect, I've got to reach this standards, or some standards compared to someone we know, a parent, a status figure, some kind of guru that we perceive. And when you think about it, it really doesn't make sense. Now, if it was hurdles, you'd probably do something like this, that you wouldn't start off with the hurdle right up there. You practice using some low hurdles. You get a bit of a run up and be able to jump over them. And you might keep the hurdles the same rate, same height, and give us some space and get used to them. And then if you did trip over, you could kind of learn, adjust, have another go, maybe even lower them, build your confidence, and start to create the messages in your head to say, this is okay, I can do this. 9 out of 10 times I clear it. Sometimes I clip the hurdle. It doesn't matter. I'm building my fitness, I'm building my skills. And then when we do that, we can start to put in a few slightly higher hurdles and gradually raise the bar within a pattern of stretch that's comfortable. And one of my original trainers used to say a good amount of stretch is 10% or less, 5 to 10%, rather than saying, let's go from 10% to 100. So there's very practical things that, and these all sound very basic, but often these things do come back to the simple things that we can do. The more we give ourselves space with our goals and think about small steps. And I mentioned last time the principle of Kaizen, which is just simply the Japanese word for taking small steps, breaking things down into things so small they're difficult not to do because they're so easy. And we learn and we build up our experience. And so we set milestones and we give ourselves space, and that includes our visual field of actually watching the kind of images that we collect in our mind's eye. And instead of having too many going on at once, instead of making them too big, well, it's okay for them to be big if it works for you. But if you're feeling that you're cluttered and things are overwhelmed, try just closing your eyes and moving the pictures away a bit, calming them down, stilling them, focusing on just one at a time. And then coming back to your physiology and breathing. There's a joke that you may have heard. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And I use that analogy a lot because people have what their equivalents of elephants, and they hold them in front of their face. It's like, I've got to do this thing, and it's so big, and it's like they're trying to see past this elephant, but the elephant is so big it obscures their vision. And that we need to step back from it. We need to kind of look around it. We also need to think sometimes, or we can think that, right, if I'm gonna eat this, if I'm gonna get through this elephant, I'm gonna decide that I'm gonna just start with a little bit of toenail first of all, and work my way up and break it down. So anyway, that's my first pattern. The second one is a pattern, and I call it "It's happening to me." And it's the sort of language we use, but it's a thought process where something happens and we think, here we go again, this has happened, this has knocked me out. It's as if we're the victim of a situation, something that's happened, and that we feel that we've lost control. And it can start with something like, well, I was giving this example to someone recently, and they said, well, actually, it happened to me this morning. They were driving to the coaching session, and a car came by and knocked their wing mirror, and the wing mirror came off. And as is the thing with modern cars, when they stopped and kind of went in, I think they phoned the garage. They said it was going to be about £600 because you can't just replace the glass; you have to buy a whole unit. So that was something that happened probably out of their control. We can't control how other people's drive. We can only control our own driving. But what then can happen is that people can say, well, my day started off badly, and everything that affected everything else that happened. That my wing mirror was knocked off my car. That made me feel stressed. I was late for the meeting because of that. I was then in a bad mood. I couldn't think clearly. This then happened, this then happened. And it's like it's a kind of, well, what do they call it when one thing knocks down another, a cascade of events. It's like this is something that's out of our control. Now, sure, the wing mirror coming off in this situation was out of this woman's control. How she responded and how she got a sense of her own expectations, maybe to feel upset, which is fine, and to think, right, I really didn't want that to happen, that's going to have an effect on my finances. But then to say, well, okay, what do I need to do next, and how do I want to be? If I'm going to go into a meeting, well, I want to take back control and park those other emotions and center myself again, and to be focused on what I want to do next. So I do appreciate that these things might be harder in practice than it might be for someone. You might say, well, it's okay for you to say this sort of stuff, Martin, this is theoretical. But the key is in the word practice. The more you practice and the more you take on these concepts, and it's kind of almost like a sneaky thing here, because we don't realize that we're giving away our control. It happens so automatically. So I'll give you some other examples of this. People might say something like, right, I get up in the morning and then this emotion, it suddenly hits me. It comes and it kind of feels like it explodes in my head or something like that. And I feel bad, and I feel not able to get up, and I feel, my emotions dip, and I, might not use that language. And by the very language they're using, they're referring to something that they perceive as external to them, as though it kind of goes, it hits them. Now, I get it in the sense of it's a thought, or it's a pitch, or it's a something that they're doing, but they don't realize they're doing it. That, when one unpacks it, they wake up and they check in on themselves, and often it might be, yesterday I wasn't feeling so good, so am I still not feeling so good? Well, I think I am. I think I am tense. I think I've got a bit of a headache. Oh, here it goes again. And they get access a level of thinking and a level of, when one starts to think, well, I wasn't feeling good yesterday, and in order to do that, we have to access those feelings. We're probably going to start to tighten up our body. And then we think, well, yeah, I'm feeling a bit achy, a bit tense. Well, yeah, because we're going into that behavior, that physiology. Because we do have control. We can do things like breathing. We can do that sort of check-in process that you talked about there. We can have things that distract us in a positive way, that we can say, well, okay, I'll just get up and I'll make myself a cup of coffee and I'll sit down and maybe I'll read for 10 minutes. So just something that helps us to come back within ourselves, feel that we're making choice, and just settle ourselves. And then using the other concept I mentioned of small steps, just thinking about, well, what's one thing that I could do now that helps me to achieve something, or tap into a sense of some kind of strength or ability that I want to access. So I suppose that, one of the things there is to watch out for the language and the situations where you feel that you're acting automatically, and it's like dominoes. And if you recognize that happening, to stop. Often the simplest thing is just to pause, to breathe, and just say, well, what's happening here? Just ask yourself. Acknowledge what you've been experiencing. Acknowledge that there have been emotions that you can accept and be curious about. And then to say, well, what is it that I want to happen next? How do I want to be in the next few minutes going forwards? And tap into that. Maybe think of a previous time when you were a bit more relaxed. But when you're, if you're sitting in the car and you pull over and stop, maybe you think about, as long as it's safe to do this, a little bit of yoga breathing or posture, and just settle yourself, and then start off again. So just the final one is linked to this, and about language. There's so much interesting about language, and we can learn from ourselves, but I just want to pick up on one kind of pattern where something has happened, but it becomes as if it's always happened. And the sort of language I'm referring to is when we say it's all going wrong. I never have confidence. no one likes me. I always feel that I'm being criticized. I tend to always feel shy in situations. And it's something which has unknowingly to ourselves lost all context. So just watch out for some of those generic things. And the way to help with this is to start to make it specific. Because if we think of ourselves and we think of a situation as always happening, like, well, I go out and things always happen to me. And I just, at work, I'm always finding myself in situations where people don't listen to me. Instead of that always, we start to draw into our mind's eye and think, well, okay, what's the reality of this? Are there some specific examples? And what happened? We start to add context and say, well, okay, yesterday there was a meeting and this person looked at me in a certain way. But how do I know that they were thinking anything about me at all? They may have just gone into their own head and been thinking about something that they've got on, something quite domestic, something quite plain, something unrelated. But even if they were looking at you in a certain way, maybe they were getting frustrated. What about the other people in the room? Maybe they were responding a different way. And even if they weren't, that was just one example. There will be lots of examples of situations where things have gone okay or have gone fair. They may not have gone brilliant. So the more we become specific about the examples we use, the less that it feels daunting. Does that make sense? So that was my three sort of examples, really. And I suppose it comes down to awareness, self-awareness, being empathetic with yourself, noticing what's happening, being curious about it, and then if it's appropriate, giving yourself some choices to change things a little. So my three examples were setting the bar, that just be careful that you don't put your goals right up there and make it too difficult to jump over. Bring them down. If it's a big goal, give yourself some distance, create a schedule, and set some small steps to practice and get your kind of fitness up, get your skill levels up, so that you can become a great hurdler over time. You can jump over the bars and have fun with it, rather than it seem daunting. And that links in the same thing about watching that you don't try and eat an elephant in one bite, that you just, that you do bring it back to little steps. The second pattern was be self-aware at times about when you might slip into this concept of it's happening to me, as if the events that happen in the outside world, which of course they do, they happen, but you are in control of your emotions. Your thoughts, regardless of how you perceive them, they always come from in here. They don't actually come from anyone else. You might hear something, but when you repeat it in your head and start to believe it, that's your thought. So it's about ownership, self-awareness, and saying, well, okay, if I'm talking like that, does that work for me? Or might I want to have a thought which is more empowering? And practice those thoughts. So you can kind of write down some different thoughts that might be more useful. Just, for example, like, yeah, I can just focus on one small step first of all, and I'll just practice getting over that first bar, and I'm going to make it really easy, and that's okay. I don't have to do it all at once. I've got time. And then the last one was awareness of language, and in particular, watching when we take something that's been a negative experience and generalizing it as if it's always happened, when the reality is that it wouldn't have always been the case, that we do behave in all kinds of ways, even if we're feeling shy or even if we're in new situations. There will be plenty of times when we just perform really well or okay, and we can draw on those. So make the situations where if something's not gone right, just make it very specific, take the learning from it, and then focus on the sort of things that you can do. So that was my 3 things.